Well, hello and welcome to First Fridays with OFO. Welcome everyone to our August. It's hard to believe it's already August, but our August offering of First Fridays with OFO, your online information session where you get to hear from EEOC subject matter experts and have the opportunity to ask questions directly of them. As you join the meeting, we ask that you hit *6 on your phone to mute yourself. If you have joined by computer, if you're online with us, we ask that you mute your microphone. Again, *6 to mute and unmute your phone, and ask that you mute your microphone, the icon next to your name, in the meeting if you have joined online. Before we get started, just want to say that we had an awesome time at the Examining Conflicts and Employment Laws Conference here in Atlanta, Georgia. It's known as EEOC's Excel Conference. It is the premier conference for HR and EEO professionals. And so I invite you to follow us on our social media for updates on when you can register for next year's conference. It's usually held around the same time, either late July or early August. And next year we will be in New Orleans. The host hotel is the Hyatt. Don't have the address information for you, but we will be in New Orleans for next year's Examining Conflicts and Employment Laws Conference. Additionally, I want to remind you that the EEOC's Office of Federal Operations Federal Sector Programs Training and Outreach Division offers up to 2 hours of no-cost outreach. This does not include travel expenses, but we do offer up to 2 hours of no-cost training to federal agencies once every 6 months. And I have provided information on how to contact us in the chat if you have joined by phone. The email address to reach out to us if you're interested in free training for your agency is Federal Training and Outreach at EEOC.gov. Again, that's up to 2 hours of no-cost outreach with travel expenses not included. Certainly we can leverage technology and do Skype meeting or Adobe Connect if you are not in the DC area. Closed captioning for today's session is available, and the closed captioning link is in the chat section. Want to invite you to follow us on our social media platforms. We are on Twitter and Facebook at EEOC Fed E News, and also on Twitter at EEOC_OFO. OFO as in Office of Federal Operations. Again, EEOC_OFO is our other Twitter handle. We are also on YouTube at EEOC Fed E News, where you can find recordings of previous webinars and First Friday sessions. And we have just recently started posting to Instagram. But I want to have you check out our YouTube page when you can, because we have a lot of recordings on there that you may find useful in training for your agency. So with that housekeeping taken care of, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. We're very honored to have Dr. Ramela El-Karzazi. She's a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and she also holds a bachelor's degree in economics. Additionally, Dr. El-Karzazi is a certified senior human resources professional and is a certified Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. She joined EEOC in October 2014 as a psychologist in the Office of General Counsel, where she provided various expert witness services. In July 2017, she moved to OFO, Office of Federal Operations, to work in the Research and Evaluations Division, also known as RED, where she has conducted government-wide research studies on EEO in the federal sector, including the study of the federal IT workforce. She has served on several interagency work groups related to EEO data, including DOL's Standard Classification Occupation SOC Manual, the Census's American Community Survey, ACS, and the EEO TAB Consortium, which is the definitive source for workforce diversity data. Also want to mention that Dr. El Karzazi is leading the effort for us here at EEOC with regard to our certification, the certification piece of our EEO Education Consortium, which will be rolling out very soon. So I want you to also stand by for that. Today, Dr. El Karzazi will share highlights from her FY 2018 study on EEO data and information management. Today's presentation will last approximately 30 minutes with about 15 minutes or so for questions. We invite you to hold your questions until the end. Again, hold your questions until the end, and you can unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone in order to ask your questions of Dr. Rommela El Karzazi. For those of you that are participating via computer, you may either unmute yourselves on your computer and ask questions, or type your questions in the chat, and I'll be happy to ask those of our presenter. And at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Rommela El Karzazi. Thank you so much for being with us today and providing this very useful information. It's a very hot topic. We've had a lot of folks traveling back from Excel that said, oh no, I'm going to miss it. But please be advised that this will be a recorded session, or this session is being recorded, and it will be rolled out on our social media platforms and posted to YouTube. Dr. El Karzazi.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and I'm very excited to be here today giving this presentation. First, I want to give a general overview on what we'll be covering. Essentially, as Lisa alluded to, I will be sharing highlights from a study I did on information management of federal sector data. I had a lot of good participation from federal agencies, and I'll get into who was involved in a minute. But then I'll also kind of discuss some of the key findings from that. We'll discuss the optimal processes for managing reporting cycles for both MD715 and for Form 462. And then I'll touch a little bit on the importance of in-house program evaluations, and then just kind of discuss data for responding to EEO complaints. So that's what we're doing today. So I want to start off again talking about broadly the importance of good data. A brief historical background. In FY 2018, federal sector programs, FSP, through the Research and Evaluation Division, again, which is red, in EEOC's Office of Federal Operations, or OFO, conducted a study led by me on information management, specifically the management of EEO data. This study was an examination of the technological systems used for information management by agencies regarding the compliance data of interest to the EEOC's mission. In other words, data that must be reported via annual federal equal employment opportunity statistical report of discrimination complaints, which is essentially known as Form 462, or federal agencies for equal employment opportunity management Directive 715, which is known as MD715. The impetus was to provide an update on previous reports regarding EEO data management practices. In 2009, EEOC identified several technological objectives to improve the management of EEO data, and frankly, several of those items had been implemented, but we hadn't necessarily reached where we wanted to go. So we implemented paperless electronic discrimination complaint filing through FedSep. However, we didn't necessarily have an automation of collection of data and some other things. Now that we have our online portal, we're continuing to make improvements, and some findings from this report were directly integrated into the new portal. So, our research efforts when we reach out to our federal agencies and we get your input really does help make improvements in our programs and how we try to support you. In 2010, we basically commissioned a study on the MD715 and Form 462 processes. And again, the resulting recommendations related to increasing operational effectiveness, improving service to customers. But then we have some other things that have come down the pike. So, for instance, a Federal News Radio 2017 survey of IT employees revealed that security of personally identifiable information and the switch to cloud-based environment where basically of a general concern of federal agencies, as was meeting the mandates of the E-Government Act of 2002. While OFO and our internal Office of Information Technology have made progress with respect to e-government, we felt that there were still opportunities to make improvements, and that was the reason why we embarked upon this study, to kind of find where were the areas where we could make improvements. And again, we've sort of, incorporated those into our online portal, so we're pleased about that. But in essence, data is important because it is integral to the administration of a model EEO program. Quality data helps you with your strategic planning, and it basically ensures that having the right data is available to you. And we know that there can be a challenge with that, but it really is important to have good data. So a little bit about information management. There are essentially 4 phases of information management. Broadly, collection, storage, retrieval, and reporting. And it's really like the life cycle of your data. How do you get it? How do you store it? How do you manage it? And how do you report on it? So this was the broader framework from which the study was organized. Our major research objective was to examine the technological systems and related processes used by federal agencies for information management of EEO data, specifically to identify deficiencies in agency processing, determine potential threats to EEO programs due to information management challenges or issues, to identify and share promising practices, and identify specifications for a potential government-wide system. So this project, again, was intended to be an examination of the technological systems, and that was the framework from which we operated. We wanted to be able to support efforts to work with agencies' partners, and we looked at various different aspects of information management. We wanted to know, for instance, where did you get your data from for the participating agencies, what types of data were collected, where did that data come from, with respect to storage, was it automated, what level of automation existed, how much manual entry was taking place. In terms of retrieval, were we certain we were able to get accurate information out of the system? Were there the necessary accesses? And then just in terms of reporting, being able to actually easily complete MD715 or Form 462, and then to make any sort of resulting action plans as a result of doing those reports. So our research objective was to really just look at information management concepts and Lean Six Sigma tools and use those to map the reporting process used by agencies to uncover any sort of process challenges. And what we ended up getting was essentially like the ideal process maps for reporting cycle, managing both the reporting cycle for MD715 and for Form 462. We gathered data from federal agencies, first using a survey, and then we used a series of different focus groups, and then we followed that up with a couple of one-on-one meetings with agencies where we conducted interviews. So we had 39 agencies complete the initial survey, and then from there we were able to have focus groups which included 15 different agencies, and then 6 of those 15 agencies were invited to sit with us for one-on-one agencies interviews. Organizational data was collected, so when we went and did these interviews, we got information concerning essentially like the information about the number of people in different positions, the organizational structure, and it really gave us a rich background through which to view the survey results and the information from the focus groups. So, some major findings. From this particular effort, there are several very sort of interesting findings. The survey, interviews, and focus groups yielded many important findings. Some of the major findings included we were able to really kind of make a determination about the ideal process, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a moment. But we learned that there were some significant challenges with gathering the necessary data. For example, working with the agency data is challenging because it required many manual steps. There was also a challenge in getting data sometimes from your agency partners or stakeholders, for example, from HR. Agencies were not necessarily able to analyze their data and make meaningful changes. So in some ways it was where agencies were meeting the reporting requirements, but then just kind of putting the report in a drawer and thinking about the next activity. And we feel that using your data to help make improvements, I mean, obviously it's part of what is supposed to be going on with MD715 and barrier analysis and those sorts of things. But just generally, the complaint data is equally valuable in terms of being able to identify potential issues and make improvements to your programs. Part of the reason why agencies weren't able to really make use of their data in a meaningful way is that agencies identify that there is a lack of analytical skills among staff. That was a major takeaway. There were recommendations made about having essentially some sort of statistical boot camp, which we're looking at thinking about trying to shape that out as part of the consortium that Lisa mentioned earlier. Some other challenges to agencies making use of their data was essentially the timing of the reporting cycle. And I think agencies were sort of always feeling like they were in the middle of reporting. And we have some suggestions that I'll cover to help manage the process so that there can be some time to think about how to, analyze the data and be able to make some improvements. And then obviously the associated process steps themselves were viewed as being challenges. Agencies, we also learned, would experience challenges in switching to a new system. This related to the fact that some agencies weren't certain if they owned their own data or knew that they didn't, or had their data in some sort of legacy system, or had a lot of manual steps in their process. And so that was something that emerged as a pain point that agencies are having. Agencies were also not ready for any sort of artificial intelligence solutions. I don't know if any of you folks listening have been contacted by companies that are now offering AI solutions. We know at EEOC this is going to be something that is more and more a part of normal data operations going forward. But in general, the major stumbling block for agencies with respect to being ready for anything using artificial intelligence related to being able to collect the data and have trust that the data being collected was sufficient and actually had the necessary levels of quality. So those were some of the major, at a high level, the findings relating to agencies. Okay. So from that, one thing that we identified was essentially a promising practice. We were able to uncover optimal reporting processes, which I'll cover in a moment. But essentially, the main thing that we really found that was effective for agencies who were able to make use of their data, were able to report timely, they had built into their process engaging directors from other units, other stakeholders year-round, so that there was a sense of ownership in the process, and it wasn't where, you know, EEO is asking HR to do something that it doesn't normally do or it doesn't have a vested interest in. Same thing with legal counsel. So throughout the fiscal year, in order to encourage a sense of ownership in the process, some successful EEO directors engaged these key stakeholders at the very beginning of a year and had a sort of annual process. It wasn't like, for example, with Form 462, reporting opens in October, so let's start thinking about it in September. That's not really helpful in terms of being able to manage your process effectively so that you can get useful insights from your data. So now I want to cover what the optimal MD715 reporting cycle looks like. First thing I want to acknowledge is, you know, it really is as soon as you kind of finish with one report, it's time to start thinking about the next. So essentially step 16 and step 1 are like handoffs to each other, where you do your action planning in consultation with your stakeholders, and you really can't get started without engaging your stakeholders. Again, to the extent that your folks in legal counsel or HR feel as though they are part of the results, the process, the easier it will be to reach out to them and get the support that you need to, you know, have a responsive call when you go out for data to these stakeholders. The next thing that typically happens is that there is a sort of formal kickoff meeting. And this kickoff meeting is basically just clarifying roles for folks, who's responsible for what. So this may involve having discussions at this point in time with HR about training data or the need for applicant flow data to the extent that you can get it, and reasonable accommodation data, those sorts of things. The step following that kickoff meeting is essentially where there is the initial compilation and verification of the tables. Once the draft of those tables has been completed, you upload it into FedSep, and then while that is going on, you begin working on parts G and H. And also at the same time, you can start looking at Part I and the executive summary. Part J is something that follows after you've completed those, and then you're basically, at that point, have a draft of the report completed. It then begins the stakeholder review process, and this is obviously a little bit different in each agency. But essentially, your folks that you were engaging in steps 1 and step 3 are on alert already that you're going to be coming to them asking for their review. They should already kind of know what this is about. There shouldn't be any surprises. Everyone should be educated to the different parts of the report. Those are the things that you really accomplish during your stakeholder engagement and your kickoff meeting. So after the initial review of the draft report is completed, there then is editing as necessary by EEO. Then senior leadership, again, depending upon your organization's approval path, will review and approve. It's then uploaded to FEDSUB, and the report is distributed back to those stakeholders. So that is key, making certain that the report is shared and the findings are discussed in an actual briefing is critical, so that, you know, legal counsel and HR can see why they've been asked to be involved, and using the information from those briefings to help with action planning, and again, engaging your stakeholders, your partners in that planning process. So we found that agencies that had a process like this tended to be timely and just reported more organizational support. Similarly, for Form 462, these agencies had a year-round approach. Agencies that were sort of promising practices used the strategy of having monthly and quarterly monitoring of complaint data. And those reports of the monitoring was discussed with stakeholders. Following that, or as a part of that, there were instructions sent to components for agencies that had subcomponents. There's then a call to EEO counselors. There's that kickoff meeting. And the kickoff meeting, again, is to just kind of help understand everyone where you're going with the report, opportunity for people that you ask data for to ask clarifying questions, and to set deadlines for when people should be supplying what you need. You then compile or generate the report. A lot of agencies do seem to be using iComplaints, which has been very beneficial to agencies that have it. There's then the review and editing of the report. There's the review from general counsel and other stakeholders. Typically, the review leads to minor revisions, which is unlike the situation for MD715. Often, the revisions for MD715 are a little bit more extensive, just because, you know, there's more narrative, there's more you know, writing the executive summary and those sorts of things. And we know that there's been some changes made with respect to, do you do an executive summary or not? But yeah, so minor revisions, and then the report is uploaded to FEDSUB. Again, it's important to distribute that report and to hold your closeout and briefings. So that is the optimal Form 462 reporting cycle. So next I want to talk about beyond reporting. You know, it's important that we get the data from you all, and we do make that summary of the data available in our annual report to Congress on our operations. But more than just the reporting, for your own benefit, it's important that you look at your programs on a regular basis internally for your own purposes. Program evaluation should be conducted for all major HR activities to ensure that EEO objectives are being met. Comprehensive barrier analyses, pay studies, training reviews, and performance management should be conducted on a schedule, ideally on an annual basis, if not more frequently, depending upon your organization's needs, and dependent upon the program in question. So, for example, with respect to selection assessments, there is a notion of burden shifting, and I'll come back to that in a second. But essentially, the data should be collected and analyzed proactively to avoid any sort of systemic issues that might be percolating. Analyses can be used as an affirmative defense in equal pay cases, assuming that once you define any sort of discrepancy, you have a plan to address it and you're taking steps to actually resolve those. Analyses can be used to help defend against least discriminatory alternatives in selection cases. While the claimant has a responsibility to first offer alternatives, agencies should not be, caught off guard and know how their assessments stack up with respect to adverse impact. Analyses can also be used to help identify deficiencies in applicant pools. Having a diverse applicant pool is obviously the first step in ensuring that you have a diverse workforce. So, like, going back to an example regarding selection assessments, if you find yourself in a situation where you've determined that there is some sort of adverse impact and there is essentially a complaint being made about the use of a particular assessment, there is burden shifting. So, at first, obviously, the plaintiff has the burden of demonstrating a prima facie case, but once that is established, the agency needs to be able to rebut the claim with validation data. So that assumes that you have been doing analysis of your program. You have to be able to show that this assessment you used it for a reason, that it is related to the job and as important. So let's say you're able to, pull that validation data off the shelf and show it and can rebut that. But the plaintiff then can come back and basically give a list of other assessments that work just as well but have less discrimination, the argument about least discriminatory alternatives. When an agency is developing its selection procedures for hire and or promotions, you really, during that process, should consider alternatives and be able to know upfront if the assessment you are choosing has equally good validity and doesn't discriminate more than those other options. With respect to a single legal standard of statistical evidence, there really is not one. Both standard deviations and the 80% rule should be examined. I would just look at both of those. When I was in a particular role or several different roles in my past where I was putting selection systems in place, this was something I did, and I did it just to make certain that I, kind of covered myself and knew that what I was putting in place for my organization was actually the best. So this is something that should be happening routinely and on a schedule. So now let's talk a little bit about responding to EEO claims. Having good records goes a very long way in rebutting systemic discrimination. Again, going back to the previous slide for a second, this is assuming that you have been doing your monitoring, you've been looking at things internally, you have established a routine for looking at, do we have issues, and taking affirmative steps to try and resolve anywhere you find something systemic. If someone is able to lay a legitimate claim of systemic discrimination against your agency or your organization, it's really because someone wasn't doing the monitoring they should have been doing, because that's something that should have been caught and rectified before it got to the point of someone filing a complaint. You definitely should be able to supply the number of employees impacted by any employment decision made by the agency. You should be able to provide data that is in an analyzable format. Agencies sometimes will provide information about, their workforce in a PDF. And from time to time, I have looked at some cases that have come up on appeals to OFO. And really just, the PDFs slow things down, but they don't stop the analysis. We, will just, find a way to convert it or key in it as necessary so that we can do whatever analyses we feel are appropriate. So it's just best to provide it in an Excel spreadsheet to the extent that you're able to do that for the type of data that's being requested. Along those same lines, an agency should not try to play hide the ball with respect to responding to discovery. Hearings do provide the opportunity for discovery. At any point, administrative judges can ask for records to be made available, and there are legal record keeping requirements. Administrative judges have the responsibility to develop the factual record. They are not, pro-agency, they're not pro-claimant, they're neutral fact finders, and they essentially rely upon, having good data to be able to make informed decisions about a particular claim. The Uniform Guidelines of Employee Selection Procedures, or UGESP, and the Federal Records Act, again, mandate that agencies make and keep records. Complainants do not have the ability to go directly into an agency system to retrieve data, so agencies are expected to respond fully to discovery requests. And again, it's not the AJ's responsibility to help you dispense of your case. The AJ is neutral and seeks a fair resolution to all EEO claims. Being able to prove that the agency took proactively or is taking proactive steps to resolve issues is very meaningful information to AJs. So, switching gears and going back a little bit to data, we've talked about, the best way to sort of manage the reporting cycle. We've talked about the need to engage stakeholders along the way and the importance of having program evaluations and doing that, and what to do if you are actually asked to respond to an EEO claim. But this last thing that I want to cover really talks about the future for agencies. As I alluded to, there are a lot of government initiatives with respect to needing to go to the cloud, needing to make data available, Open Data Act and those sorts of things. And EEO is not going to necessarily be exempt from that. So as EEO directors, you need to start thinking about your data, again, more as an asset and not necessarily something you just have to report on. So with that, future technological needs. And these were things that were identified from the information management study. With respect to data collection, there are challenges around being able to get personally identifiable information from individuals from other systems, and that's something that agencies need to think about, how they can partner better with their HR to get data such as applicant flow data. With respect to case management, again, EEOC has taken some steps with its new online portal to try and improve some things around case management. And so we're doing our part on our side, but internally, to the extent that your agency can have a system that it can use to kind of keep track of where its cases are, is beneficial. With respect to cloud storage, again, our new system has necessary backups and is going in that direction, the agencies for their own internal data need to think about that. With respect to reporting, currently we are looking at streamlining Form 462. We typically make changes to MD715 to improve that. So EEOC is committed to improving the reporting process on our end. What I would say for agencies is to really think about your internal processes and taking a year-round approach where it's just an aspect of a program that gets managed. It's not something that's treated as a last-minute sort of surprise, so that you can better get the support that you need from your legal counsel and your HR, and at the same time be able to really leverage your data to be able to make decisions. There's obviously concerns about controlled access, not necessarily just breaches, but people going in and looking at things they shouldn't be looking at. There's lots of concerns about that, especially as the data is in more sort of a system as opposed to just manual. Obviously, we're always concerned about privacy and confidentiality. We're concerned about making things easier to use. And again, one thing that we really took time to think about was in developing our online portal was trying to make it as user-friendly as possible. We're still continuing to make improvements to our system, but to the extent that your systems internally can be easier for your HR friends to use, it would go a long way for them helping you get the data that you need. Again, we know that there's a lot of challenges around training data and applicant flow data, and we encourage agencies to look at how they could maybe deal with those things internally using technology as a possible solution. With respect to interoperability, one of the things that kind of concerned us the most was that some agencies, if they left their current provider for, let's say, their Form 462 data, they weren't certain that they would actually be able to take their data with them. We encourage EEO directors to become knowledgeable on the fact that they need to own their data and to have conversations to make certain that they can, take it out of one system and easily put it into another, if that's something they decide to do for whatever set of reasons. The worst thing that can happen to an agency is you go from one system to another system, and the data that you had in the old system can't be transferred to the new system. So interoperability is something that agencies should really think about. Expandable, meaning that there's new things that are always coming down the pike. Again, I mentioned artificial intelligence. I think more and more there's going to be an integration of that in future EEO systems, maybe to try and predict where there could be a problem of a certain type based on some organizational factors. And finally, affordability. We at EEOC want reporting to be cost-effective for all agencies, and we're trying to do our part with respect to providing good solutions through FedSep and our online portal. But we know that affordability is something that agencies think about, and we appreciate that. So with that, that's all I wanted to cover. Lisa, I think we can go ahead and take some questions.
All righty, so the floor is open for questions. I'll first check the chat, and then those that have questions that are participating by phone or who would like to open up their mic and pose questions, we invite you to do that. Again, please mute your microphone if you are not asking a question. We do have one question in chat, and that is there a suggested timeline for these steps?
So really, with respect to Form 462, you would have your kickoff meeting for your next go-around probably no later than January. You report in October. We understand that folks are going on leave for the holidays or use or lose in November and December. But really, January, you should kind of hit the ground running and be ready with your kickoff meeting, and use November and December for the opportunity to let people know that you're going to be scheduling a briefing to talk about the reporting cycle that you just completed. Do your action planning based upon that, and then just get ready to go again. And it's like you have to work both cycles at the same time, making improvements while monitoring. So with respect to MD715, things are a little different right now. We're looking at trying to get back on the sort of normal schedule, but it would follow the same thing. Essentially, a month after you've finished your reporting, you should be briefing your internal stakeholders on the reporting cycle, and just start repeating the steps after that. Okay, other questions?
Alrighty. There is one in the chat. Given that many agencies have been using digital complaints tracking systems for years, I'm curious if in your outreach you found any agencies who have started to dispose of digital records like they would with paper files from these systems per records requirements.
We have not. I think everyone is still holding on to their records. And I think that EEO directors really need to work with their IT folks on coming up with a records management plan for digital records. There is, electronic discovery more and more. So that might be a factor about what gets retained and what, can't be deleted. So EEO directors are encouraged to work with their OIT to make certain that any sort of e-discovery obligations are met. And just to develop the regular routine of when things would be kind of archived off, if not outright deleted.
Are there any additional questions for Dr. El-Karzazi? We'll give you a moment if you're typing in the chat. While we await those questions, I do want to remind you again, as we mentioned earlier, that we are rolling out an EEOC Education Consortium. It'll consist of 3 components: certification, engagement, and education. So look forward to hearing more about that. As I mentioned, Dr. El-Karzazi is co-leading the effort to professionalize the practice of EEO through the consortium. What we are looking to do is certify individuals at various levels of proficiency in EEO practice, and so that will be coming out eventually. Something that you can certainly look forward to. And but the consortium itself should be standing up fairly soon, and we invite you to email us at edcon, EDCON, at eeoc.gov. Again, edcon at eeoc.gov, to be added to our mail list for updates on this exciting initiative. Again, an opportunity for you to get standardized training and to network with other EEO practitioners, and to certify your level of proficiency in the practice of EEO. Very exciting. Again, that email address is edcon at eeoc.gov. If you'll email us, we'll put you on the mail list and be sure to get updates out to you. Okay, back to the chat. There is a question. Did you gather format suggestions for the different data sources? Example given, training that would ease the interaction with IT or HR.
So we did not go into specific formats. because we recognize that every agency is different, and they're working with, in some cases, proprietary systems that have been designed in-house. In other situations, they're using something off the shelf or something that has been modified. So we did not necessarily want to go so far as to say, your document should be in X format, or your particular process should result in X type of format. Obviously, with respect to reporting, for example, with Form 462, there is, a template that we provide as a part of the reporting process that is an Excel document, and we do obviously require folks to create an XML document as at the end of that, inputting into the Excel template. But we recognize that every agency has its own unique challenges with respect to systems.
Okay. If we have any questions from the phone lines, please, you're welcome to unmute yourselves by pressing *6 to ask your question at this time. Okay, while we await any additional questions that we may have in the chat, I'd like to provide Dr. El-Karzazi's email address for those that may have questions. Please, with regard to copies of the presentation itself, if you have not downloaded it from in today's session, if you're online, I will be sending that out to everyone. Again, I will be sending out a copy of Dr. El-Karzazi's presentation today's presentation to everyone that is participating. If you do not receive a copy of the presentation by 1:30 Eastern Standard Time, please reach out to me at Federal Training and Outreach at eeoc.gov, and I'll be happy to forward it. Dr. El-Karzazi's email address is romella.elkarzazi@eeoc.gov. Dr. El-Karzazi, we do have another question from the chat, and it is EEOC moving forward with developing a government-wide data repository that aligns with your suggestions?
So we are taking some initial steps, and it's not going to be an overnight process. It's not going to be something that folks can, see 2 years from now. But our online portal is kind of the first step that we're taking in that direction. We are able to, provide better case management for agencies now, and we're going to continue to make improvements to that system. But that's sort of like the building block in the beginning.
Okay. Alrighty. Dr. El-Karzazi, if you would, we'll allow just a moment for any additional questions before we close out.
Sure.
Again, those that are on the phone, let me unmute just in case individuals are having a difficult time unmuting themselves. If you have something else going on in the background that would be disruptive to the meeting, I am unmuting the phone now. Please mute yourself back with *6 so that everyone can hear and we can get a clean recording as well. Participants have been unmuted.
Well, while we're waiting for another question, I would like to say that data is becoming more and more important. And EEO directors were clearly sharing with me that there is a need to make a contribution to the strategic direction of the organization. They're expected to be able to come, with facts and figures and essentially proof of how the organization or agency is doing. Having EEO data is critical to managing a model EEO program and being an employer of choice. And as data becomes more and more big, agencies will need to ensure that their technology is sufficient to meet these changes that we see.
Thank you so much, Dr. El-Karzazi. Looks like we don't have any additional questions at this time. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating in today's First Fridays with OFO. Thanks especially to Dr. El-Karzazi for an awesome presentation. Very informative.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, this session is recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube site, and I will be certain to send a copy of the link out to everyone that we have on our mail list, as well as those individuals that registered through our survey link. Again, thank you so much for participating in First Fridays with OFO, your online information session where you get to ask questions of EEOC subject matter experts and hear from the authorities on those topics of interest to you. So look forward to next month. We'll be putting out information via email as well as via social media on our speaker for next month, as well as the topic. Again, thanks everyone, and have an awesome weekend.